Welcome to the Queens of Quality podcast, where we talk about some of the basic and not so basic impacts of compliance and quality within the pharmaceutical and biotech industry. Your host, Micheline Bradley, has insight and stories from over 25 years in the industry, and each week she will meet you here to bust common misconceptions and myths, update you on industry news and trends, share great discussions with knowledgeable guests, and solutions to challenges that will make your life in bioscience not just easier, but more gratifying. All of this is done with a balance of levity and irreverence that is much needed for work that is inherently serious and has very real repercussions on patients' health and safety. The Queens of Quality can be found for free wherever you catch podcasts. You can check the show notes for our website, metisconsultingservices.com, and for more info. Now, please sit back and hold on to your hat. It's your favorite Queen of Quality, Micheline Bradley.
Hi, and welcome back to Queens of Quality. I am your host, Micheline Bradley, and joining me today is Forest Flodin. And Forrest is a BD person, and he and I have known each other for a few years now. We have a little bit of a history, and we are going to talk today a little bit about what we wish that people knew going into projects. Forrest, welcome.
Thanks, Micheline. Great to be here. Appreciate the invite. Long-time listener, first-time caller kind of thing.
That's one of my favorite movies. Please tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, definitely. So as you mentioned, in BD currently for a CRO, but over my 20-year career, all based in San Diego, I've been on the early CRO, discovery, lead optimization of small molecules side of things. Worked in ADME, preclinical ADME DMPK for Arena Pharmaceuticals as an analytical scientist. Worked for a startup that Pfizer had bought doing advanced biologic conjugation products. So a lot of cancer targeted things, VEGF, EGFR, Ang2, a little GLP-1 in there, which is now, of course, the hottest topic in the industry. So know about that a little bit firsthand. And then switched over to kind of the business and strategy side, including stints with the strategy group at Illumina, doing a startup where I was going to do in-licensing and BD, but did product strategy, marketing, management, manufacturing, kind of everything, the typical wear every hat in a startup kind of endeavor. And then after that, figured out that I really enjoyed business development and sales and kind of aligning solutions to the folks that need them. And so I've been focused in CRO for the past 9 years with a variety of different CROs, from 150 sized specialists in ophthalmics up to 30,000 globally in kind of one of the big 5 CROs, and a couple in between that were either specialized or kind of mid-sized. 1,000 to 2,000, which is not even close to 30,000, but really kind of always with the goal of, I want to make an impact. I want to help support the sponsors and clients to get their product to market, to help patients. How best can I do that? And I've done that by, aligning the right services, the right people with the products in need. We can all feel good about what we're doing in the daytime, and hopefully get some products to the patients who need them. So that's kind of a little bit of a nutshell, and I pull from those different experiences, kind of in each of the sponsor facing interactions that I have.
Excellent. And so what do you think your experience in the lab and with the variety of positions you've held throughout the years, how does that help you to approach CROs or sponsors? And what do you want to see different?
Okay. So it's a little different answer depending on if it's sponsors or CROs. I'll put the sponsor hat on first. I think having the background of having been on the sponsor side, worked with service providers, kind of understand, especially the West Coast mythos, where, you have a baby, you're a little biotech, you're driving really hard, really fast. You don't know stuff, but you're going to do it anyway. And kind of having that almost frenetic energy to try to get things done quickly, but also the right way to get your product either to POC where you can partner it or hopefully to market where it gets to patients. I think that's a great mentality to understand. And it's especially with, if you are a small biotech, East Coast or West Coast, understanding how your personality might match up with a potential service partner or not match up. So East Coast, West Coast is different mentalities. And a lot of times the CRO industry is heavy East Coast, and a lot of times they're kind of fragmented in how they're supporting clients. So, you have a startup person for your clinical trial, they have 6 people they're working with. So how do you kind of understand that when you're looking to select vendor partners? Are they small? Are they big? What's the dedicated, how is the staff dedicated to your project? How do they manage that and balance it? All key components that can impact your project and your experience of working with a service vendor. On the vendor side, I think it's kind of the other side of that coin. How do you kind of instill folks, like, people are there for the right reason. They want to do a good job. They want to deliver. But at the end of the day, it's, they're working for a product that isn't theirs. So how do you kind of instill that motivation and that care for the client and their product and their timing that can really make it a great experience versus an okay experience? So I oftentimes, even though I'm in BD and once I get the contract signed, some people wash their hands. I tend to not do that. I like to sit in the project meetings. I want to know that the project's going the way that I said it would. And if it's not, I'll be part of the solution that mitigates those impacts and aligns the teams to kind of move forward the right way. And so, I'll oftentimes, they'll say, hey, yes, we're going to get an update from the site. I'll let you know next week when I get, in this meeting, and I'll talk to the team, the CRO team after and say, hey, when you hear about that, let the client know, because this is their baby, what they're doing 24/7. They don't have 6 projects they're on. They have 1. And you're the key person on that right now. So get that info to them, quickly. And I think it's, understanding those dynamics as we start to bring more able technology solutions into the mix is going to be pretty critical, because there's a lot of potential benefit from, using Gen AI and agentic AI and all this new capability that's coming into the market. But at the end of the day, it's people and teams making decisions and how do they work together, whether it's people at the sponsor, people at the CRO, people at the sites, patients, at the core of it, it's still a human challenge. And how do we, enable technology to really support us in those key interactions as opposed to replacing those with kind of an automatic check the box activity.
So one of the things that I've noticed in my stint in the industry is a real dip. You mentioned East Coast, West Coast, and the differentiation in, what services are provided and who's located where. One of the things that I noticed early on was, larger pharmaceutical companies in San Diego gave way to many smaller pharmaceutical companies. And then, you see kind of an ebb and flow where it's, more CRO services, less bigger pharmaceutical companies, move to the East Coast, go up to the Bay Area. And how do you think that impacts? I mean, it's not nearly as much of an impact now, I think, as it was 20 years ago. So maybe I just answered my own question because, I remember back in the day when we were sending out, triplicate paper CRFs.
Yes.
And we don't do that anymore, which is excellent. That is so good, because I have this conversation really regularly about, it's 2025. Let's go ahead and put away the abacus and move to something that's more agile. And I don't mean that in the brand name, but, we want something that offers flexibility and a more rapid response time, and for sponsors and service providers alike to be able to pivot to where they need to go and what they need to offer. And that brings us to, before we got on here and started recording, we were talking about a meme that I saw on LinkedIn that made a reference to it took 2 days for the enclave to name a pope. Maybe it doesn't have to take 6 months to fill a position or get a contract started. And can we speak to the timing thing a little bit? Because we've talked, you and I have spoken repeatedly about ramp up time for projects and how that, even when a client being a CRO or a sponsor organization identifies the project, identifies the issues, identifies where they need to go with it, it's that ramp up time. And why does that take so long? And what can we do to fix that?
Yeah. And there's, every project's a little different. Every interaction's a little different. And there's all kinds of, I have 10 stories that literally just jump to mind of like different timings and different kind of lessons learned that can come from those. I think that there's things that folks do well. And I think if I was guiding a sponsor to start a new project, I would have them as early as possible do kind of the broad vetting. Like, what are the key criteria that you have? Do you want a team that's done exactly this before? Do you want a team that's done it adjacently? Do you want a team that's really going to be kind of right sized for your organization? Or do you need a team that's, got global capabilities that you could never build? All of these come with different trade-offs. But I think early in that process, if a sponsor can identify a few vendor partners that make a ton of sense, they have the right size, they have the experience, you meet with their experts or whoever the tip of the spear is there, and you get that, yes, I could work with this group. Take those 3 or 4 organizations into your process. Don't take 8. Don't take 10.
Right.
Like, the more decisions you have to make, the more challenging those decisions are. I also do think there's times when people are like, well, we worked with that team, we got the team, it's fine. If it works, it works. I think a lot of times it doesn't work because the team that you had 2 years ago at that CRO isn't there, and the management's changed and they're doing things differently, and it's going to be a totally different experience. So I think you do have to kind of do a current screen to say who's here, who's the right partner, but try to narrow that funnel early so you have people that you are very sure you'll be able to work with when you take them into your process. I do find when sponsors keep everyone kind of Heisman distance, it slows things down. You want to engage, you want to get tight, you want to try to get that advice early. Because, when I'm doing a bid meeting and I'm the third team pitching, and I know this because I'm on the last day in the afternoon, and my team is bringing up thoughts that your team has never heard, that one gives me a good feeling. But 2, it goes, yeah, there's some more discussion you probably need to do here. This is not going to start as fast as you think it is. On the speed, I think that there's a lot of there's a variance in how fast people can start, and that starts with the regulatory environment, whether it's an IND here in the US or it's the agency in the country of interest. There's a timeline for that. There's a timeline to get sites contracted. There's a timeline to get sites under CDA. Even there's a build time for the EDC and whatever associated databases you have. So there's a bunch of stuff that goes into it. The regulatory, that's going to be what it is. And that is obviously potentially in flux with the recent upheaval with the FDA.
I was going to ask about that, actually.
There's kind of some variance in there and some question marks. And I think that's inherent in what we do. We keep changing things. Organizations change what they do. As a recent kind of vogue point, COVID happened. Suddenly we all needed all these e-pros and e-consent and e. Has that really changed the world? Not necessarily for the better. Some of it's been better. Some of it's just been more tools that cost money and don't help you. So I think in that way, the industry does get a little cyclical, does have some trends and some things that come into vogue, and then maybe a couple, months or years later fall out of vogue because they didn't really deliver on what they should have been able to do. That said, we should be getting to a place where to go generate a protocol, to generate ICFs, to generate these, data capture systems should not be a 12-week process. It should be tools helping us get to the 90% minimal viable product. And then our expert humans, whether on the sponsor side, CRO, or in conjunction, get it over the line with the right details that need to be in there. And that human in the loop aspect that I think is pretty key for proper implementation of technology solutions. And I might have jumped ahead on topics there, but
no, that's fine. And I actually, so you know that I've been involved with the AI pieces, and we did a series on Queens of Quality. We called it our mini season on AI. And I very much am concerned about the human in the loop piece, and especially with the announcement this week that the FDA had pushed out a AI platform to review submissions, and have responses in a matter of weeks. And then hearing about some of the issues that it has, and I'm like, wow, so maybe that's not something that we should be rushing. I don't know.
Yeah, and there is this. I think it's going to be more problematic with AI because AI is very persuasive in telling you that it can do what you hope it can do.
Sure.
I'll use myself as an advantage, as an example there. I can be very persuasive, but I'm not a doctor. I'm not a pharmacist. I just know a little bit about all these things and I can make a strong argument. And AI will do the same thing. It looks really good until you get into the details. I would actually say it will likely be more, or should be more, like the relatively recent rollout of the Metis system in Europe, where there was sandboxing and testing and testing and testing. And then eventually the system rolls out and there's still bugs and there's still challenges to it. But you could find people who, and I worked for one of them, where they'd been in the sandbox for a long time. So they kind of knew what wasn't going to work, what was going to work, and what the actual timelines were going to be. Because what nobody likes is when you get in and say, hey, it's going to be 6 weeks, and then it's actually 12 weeks, and there's 4 review cycles in there that you didn't know about, and some extra expenses because, we needed to submit to this organization or that organization.
Absolutely.
So knowing what that looks like, or better yet, what it should look like, because, you throw it into Metis, Germany has a question you'd never expected, and then you have to spend 3 weeks kind of responding to it because you didn't think about that with your product. So I think that, I like that the agency's leaning into things and doing things maybe a little more rapidly, but, there's always the
same time
to not work well.
Right. And I think that the emphasis really still needs to be on that we still need the human in the loop. We still need to ensure that we have oversight into all of the pieces, because we can't just push things through and say, oh, that was reviewed, that went through an AI review cycle. That is not enough. That is
and there's a number of companies right now where you can go and talk to them and they say, hey, give us a target, we'll give you a drug product candidate in 3 hours. And it's like, well, what does it look at? Well, it looks at all the literature. Oh, is it curated? Because there's literature that you can reproduce and there's literature that you can't reproduce. And the AI tool, much like the ones that are trained on the internet, doesn't actually know the difference between what's good and what's bad. So There's some opportunities to kind of shoot yourself in the foot. I was actually at an AI panel yesterday, and this was pretty interesting. They were talking about the business models with the open AIs and whatnot. And it was kind of interesting because they were like, well, right now, these models are becoming very capable. They're going to replace these entry-level jobs. And cost-wise, they're very accessible. But companies are laying off tons of people. And guess what? Once that expertise is out of the organization and you actually need the AI, it's not going to be $20 a month per user. It's going to be $100,000 per user per year. So, and now that your organization doesn't have the people that actually know how to do the job, you're just going to have to pay for the AI that does.
and
so that was a great perspective.
Yeah. And I think that's something that I've seen with some of my clients as well, is that they have a great concern about, actually that's a whole other tangent, but they have a great concern about people with institutional knowledge leaving when, in my opinion, that should not be their greatest concern.
Yeah, but I think institutional knowledge has been underrated. And from experience, and I'll just say leadership for lack of a more granular term, but leadership will say, oh, well, that's a research associate. That's fine. We'll just get another research associate. And then, but from the tactical standpoint, you go, this particular research associate ran every one of your in vivo experiments on your lead compound for the last 5 years. That's knowledge that you can extract and knowledge that you're going to make the same mistakes again. Like it's not replaceable. We should talk a little bit more about kind of the different models that are available though, because I do think that to come back to kind of how sponsors should be selecting their partners. There's a gradient between, two ducks in a bag where the CRO or other service providers are going to be providing 100% of what's going on, versus a lot of the bigger organizations where they have everything in house. They've got ClinOps and data management, and monitoring and medical safety and all that. And then as any good gradient, there's a mixture in between where, people will have data management and safety, but not have everything else, or they'll have ClinOps, but it's really to kind of select and manage the vendors that are delivering. Really, the organization has to get to a place where it is comfortable. I do find it interesting when organizations are relying on certain key people that are really not in the organization. They're consultants. I think having a core team in your organization that knows what it's doing and is making those decisions from a standpoint of having skin in the game is advantageous. But how you actually do it from there, I think is, you can bring it in house, you can run it pretty lean, get some organizations to help you that, they have that site network in Latin America that you need. So let them do the language and the contracting, and then you're coming in and, managing and monitoring to make sure that they're actually doing what they need to do. There's different flavors that are available. And I think that, thinking about all that and matching it up to the size of your organization, what you're trying to achieve is very key.
So I guess that still brings back for me part of the question of what's the expected lead time to get this party started?
And that depends. It depends. So
that answer.
I know it's the wrong answer, and that's the problem. Because again, it's depending on which data management vendor you're with. It might be 2 weeks to get your EDC. It might be 12 weeks. It shouldn't be anymore. It should be a week or two or less. And that's something where I think the AI potential definitely should be changing things, and hopefully
take nearly as long. Like I said, it doesn't take as long now to do a database build as it did back when we were sending CRFs in triplicate. And the same expectation is very true for how long it should take to decide. And one of the areas that I find makes it very difficult to decide on a group to work with is that often a sponsor group or a CRO or anyone who's looking to hire consultants or external vendors or service providers is we don't always know what it is that we need. We have an idea, but we don't have it all worked out. And I'm not saying that anybody has to have all of the pieces worked out, but be available for the discussion. You are working with these people. This is not, and this goes back to, again, a very familiar theme here at Queens of Quality of take down the silos and actually play nice together, work together on getting the pieces in, and admit when you don't know, and have the conversations, ask the questions. Not everybody's going to be the expert in all of the areas. People are going to make mistakes. I recently was involved in an audit where the group it was a partner audit, and the group that we were doing the audit on behalf of, they were sent documentation by the auditee, their partner, and this was over an MAH thing, and it was a report of out of window data exchange, and they sent it to me, and they were like, well, did you look into this? And I was like, well, I looked at the title of it, and it looks like it's stuff where it's presented as that you were late, not that they were late. And they were like, well, this was provided before, and we don't have this information. So then I went to the auditee, and this was after the audit, and I said, can you just tell me what this is and explain this? And they're like, yeah, this is when they were late providing information to us. And then I get this thing. We don't go back and ask questions after the audit is completed. It's like, well, and this is why we have a communication problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the communication is often where things break down, and it's both the communication ahead of the project during the planning, and then especially in those early stages. So, I've had, we're starting the study up. They have an FPI date. They're very motivated, and this is professional groups, and we've negotiated the site contract language, used their template, and then wait 3 weeks to have it signed off by the legal team. And that is the only thing holding up the first patient dose.
Yeah.
And it's that's where, as you're setting these things up, and it starts early. It starts when you're first engaging. It starts at the RFI, it starts at the RFP, it starts at the bid meeting. What I always say is, like, we're presenting a team that this sponsor is going to want to work with for the next 2 to 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And think about that. When you're going to have lunch with someone, if you said, hey, you might have to work with this person for the next 2 to 5 years every week, it might change your approach to that lunch. You might ask some different questions. But I see a lot of times where the communication isn't set clearly right off the bat, and that slows things down, because it's either, we didn't know we needed this piece, or, oh, we have a review in here, but the reviewer's on vacation for a week and we didn't name a backup. And there's so many different pieces, whether it's the green light package for the site, or it's the ICF review, or, hey, did you give us the most recent protocol with the IB? Oh, we're reviewing that. Okay. Is it the safety plan? Is it the project management plan? All these different plans and things that have to be put in place before you can even kind of move the needle forward with getting, IT shipped to the site and, patients dosed, etc. And I think that I've worked with some organizations where they try to think proactively about these things. So they might, you have a traditional kickoff meeting, which is the teams meet, they discuss the activities and all that. I like organizations that do like a pre-kickoff meeting, because they align and they say, hey, I'm the one writing the safety management plan. Who is my counterpart? How do we communicate? Okay, I'm 80% done with this. I'm going to send it to you in a week. Can you review it there? Okay, 3 days after? Excellent. Now we know we can wrap this up by 2 weeks from now, and it will be ready. That's a real project-based interaction that's going to achieve some kind of positive result. And you do that across every single facet, whether it's data management, project management, monitoring. And then hopefully you can select a partner that kind of proactively does these things. So, right. All right, you're collecting data, you're visiting. Ideally, you're getting some kind of signals in between your monitoring visits. So when you say some lab gets recorded and it's, guess what? People's temperature is not 125 degrees Fahrenheit. If that gets recorded, you need to reach out and say, hey, what are we doing here? What's happening? And the same thing with data quality, as you're collecting data, you should start cleaning it somewhere in the middle to say, hey, is this data good? Are there queries? Do we need to go back and ask? Especially when you get into PROs and COAs and things that are, maybe they're in your primary endpoint, maybe they're a secondary endpoint. Are we collecting this data cleanly? You have a multi-center study. Are all the raters rating things the same way? These are things that at the end of the day, they're going to mess up your project, but they can be monitored and managed and mitigated while you're actually in the study or in the project.
Absolutely. And that's always a thing, like, begin with the end in mind. What are you doing? What are you doing now? And how is that impact going to land 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now? This phase 1 study and how this data is collected and how the data integrity shows up and how we can trace data from the raw data package all the way through all of the iterations, it still needs to trace back to that initial cut of that raw data.
Right.
And how is this going to look when we're through phase 3 and we've got the NDA going in? You don't want to go back then and say, ooh, you know what? We messed that up.
Right. Well, and there's certain things that it's not necessarily a mistake, but there's certain things that sponsors sometimes don't do early in their programs that do come back to be potential challenges later. So, for example, if you're a small sponsor, you should look at what that whole path looks like. A lot of times it's like, hey, I need to know how much this study costs because I need to get my VC to approve it. And that's great, but you may also end up at a point where you said you raised 10 million, you ran the study for 9, it didn't exactly do what you needed, and you don't know what the next step is. So when especially VC stage companies come and they ask me for a budget, I'll say, I'm happy to give you a budget. What does your program look like? How does your program get to valuable inflection points? And what do you think that the burn rate's going to be to get you to those points? Because you may have a great program and run one study and get some data that gets you bought, but you shouldn't plan on that. That's not, right. It's like, hey, I'm going to go to the store and buy this lottery ticket and it's going to work. I'm going to retire. Maybe, but probably not. So I think that's one planning point that I would say folks need to think about more. What does your program look like? And you start thinking about optionality. Do we run one study? Do we run an adaptive study? How can we accelerate these things and also, reduce the cost of them overall? And a lot of times you can do that by thinking ahead and saying, hey, if we hit this data point, we can roll it into an adaptive design, get breakthrough therapy designation, and hey, now we have a 2 to 3 year development to, valuable data readout versus a 7-year. Things that slow people down, sometimes they'll go, okay, well, I'll just use whatever EDC the CRO says for this study. 7 studies later, 5 CROs later, you're going to bring your data together for the NDA. And it's a nightmare because you have 7 different databases that now you're trying to bring together into one for your submission. Don't do that. Have a data strategy early on. Similarly in safety. I mean, phase 1, healthy. Okay. Yeah. Is Argus overpowered? Sure. But later on, when you're trying to bring 3 or 4 different databases together, it's a nightmare. Don't do that.
Or versions, even if it's versions of the same database.
Even if it's versions of the same database, you still have to get the data in and clean it and make sure it's all valid. And then also thinking about evidence early. I had one, it was a really cool gene therapy approach to a childhood onset disease. And they were going to be dosing peds of different ages. And I was like, that's great. You need to be tracking every single one of these patients. Where were they at developmentally? What happened after you dosed them? Because odds on, if you're genetically modifying someone who has an autism or a learning disability, it may make a huge difference if you dose them when they're 4 or when they're 10.
Yep.
And the value potential for that and the justification for it from a regulatory approval and commercialization standpoint could be way different. You have gene therapies where, great, it keeps the patient from dying. That's great. But does it enable them to live a full, healthy life? That's a different question. So, keeping someone alive, and we see it in oncology a lot, keeping someone alive for another couple of weeks or month has value. Now, if you can actually cause the tumor to regress and they live 5 to 10 more years, that obviously has much, much more value. So I think there's different questions that sponsors need to think about from a cost trade-off perspective, but also from timelines. I had a conservative sponsor where they wanted to see every readout and kick it around for 6 to 9 months about strategy. And when you think about that from a program perspective, you're going to run a phase 1, phase 1/2, a phase 2 or 2, and a couple phase 3s. If you wait 9 months between every one of those programs, you've added 2 to 3 years to your development timeline,
right?
2 to 3 years that you're not on market. So I think always planning for success and giving yourself the option to not have to pay for that thing later on is crucial.
And I have to put a plug in here, and I feel like this is a good time for it, that planning for success and setting yourself up for success, that's our ultimate goal, right? And I don't mean to speak in cliches all the time. That actually kind of makes me a little but we do need to talk a little bit about not sacrificing quality for cost.
Right. Yeah. There's always that kind of traditional people envision it as a stool. Your stool has 3 legs, one's cost, one's time, and one's quality. And you can only get 2 of them.
That exact thing in another episode of this season where
Yep.
so I
Yeah,
want to
and
just
and it is
for
true.
bringing that
I
up.
mean, it is true. It's like there are trade-offs. And so, you want to go, okay, you're a little company, you're like, hey, we need to go with this, with this marquee CRO. Nobody gets fired for choosing, I won't say them, but, a big CRO. Nobody gets fired for it. But it's going to be the most expensive route, most likely. It's going to probably be slower, but they do know everything. So hopefully,
But do they?
Well, they may. They should. They cost like they do. I would say you can get people who know everything and deliver it the right way. Now, you're a small company. I would hazard a guess, a good one, that you'll find someone who's more right sized for what you need to do. They're going to be a little less expensive. They're going to go faster, and they're probably going to do a higher quality job because that's their bread and butter, and you're more important to them than someone with a $500 million portfolio that they could never service anyway. So your study is really their study, and they're going to treat it like that. I think it's hard to get to saving money and getting the best quality and getting the fastest timeline. There is always a trade-off there. But I often think that getting a great team who's going to deliver quality work is actually going to get you the best timeline because there's not going to be rework and mistakes in there. I had a client we were advising, and they were very cost conscious. They really liked the endpoint they had. It was a really hard endpoint to prove easily, and they were just set on doing it. And they're like, well, you guys are really expensive. Can you come down? And we said, hey, what's the most expensive trial? It's actually the 2 phase 3s that you already failed because of data quality and endpoint issues. So maybe this one you have to get right. I won't tell you the end of that story, but
Thanks.
make decisions.
Yeah.
I've also had ones where, two examples. One, I have a number of clients where they come in and they're like, all right, we need to do this volunteer study, but we want to get an early efficacy read. And I kind of say, hey, you can do that, but you might actually think about just doing 2 studies, because any changes to either part of that study means you have to update the whole protocol and do all the amendments, and it costs money and it slows things down. So maybe get your safety read and then pick a site where you're going to do a small cohort of patients as a separate study. It actually will take the same time, but it might save you money, and it might be a little bit quality-wise cleaner because you have your compartment over here that shows safety and your compartment over here that shows a little bit of efficacy. Awesome. So that's a good approach. And now I'm going to forget my other example. Edit. It was a good one too. Yeah, I can't remember. All good.
Excellent. So, last words. What do you have? If you had one takeaway that you wanted people to remember in venturing into this area at all, what would it be?
I would say people are really the focus. And I think that's something that needs to be very front of mind in how sponsors and CROs approach this. At the very center is the patient and the stakeholders. Just outside of that is the site, the PIs, the site staff, the nurses, the folks that are actually going to be treating them. And then the next layer outside of that is there's a project team at the sponsor. There's a project team for the CRO. It's at the end of the day, it's a human interaction, and no project goes 100% right. So establishing the lines of communication, establishing trust, establishing that we know that, hey, occasionally someone's going to show up. They're not going to record the data right. There's going to be some kind of issue. How do we escalate this? I'll give you a great example of when it works right. I had a client, they had a complicated oncology trial where it had dual endpoints to when they would stop enrollment. One was a patient number, which they had hit. They were not enrolling patients. One was a lesion type, which they didn't know if they had hit it or not. I get a call at 8:30 in the morning on a Thursday or Friday. Hey, we have a patient. They're at the site in Florida. We want to enroll them, but enrollment's locked because we hit the patient number. 30 minutes later, that enrollment was open. They enrolled the patient. The patient had surgery. I was in the communication loop, but they'd gotten to the PM, they'd gotten to the project director, they'd gotten it open. So even though I was able to act within 30, 45 minutes of receiving this, finding out who the right person was, making sure that it was pushed up the flagpole to get, immediately addressed. The project team was set up right. They were engaged. They got it done. And is that something you expect? No, but people people moved, they moved what they were doing. They got it in gear because there was a patient who needed the therapy and the sponsor wanted them on it. The site wanted to enroll them and they got it done. So that's an example of where that pre-planning, building those lines of communication and trust really enabled the right thing to happen. If you don't do it that way, then you end up with delays and pointing fingers, and it's a lot messier. Like, I think going in with the mentality that something's going to go wrong, but if we're set up right to communicate, to bring these issues up, to solve them as opposed to blame people, that's where you get a project that really goes well. And at the end of it, you get project teams to go, that was a great experience. Hopefully the drug works. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But at the end of the day, like, we're all people, we're working on these things. And I think, to go back to your statement, you had a little bit about San Diego, so the difference is in the areas. It's important. Reputation is important. The number of clients I've had in the Bay Area where I'm like, I have 3 clients. The head of clinical was at the other 2. This medical director was at the other 2. And you're just like, folks move around. So, you got to be very upfront in your interactions and your delivery. And occasionally you got to say, that's not the right thing to do. I had one where the ClinOps director, they really wanted to do a completely decentralized trial in a rare disease. And we looked at it as a project team. We said, no, this needs to be a hybrid trial. They need to be seeing their doctor. The doctor needs to be in the loop. This is not a good trial to run decentralized. Most of it was fine, but they needed to put the doctor in the loop. And we didn't bid on that. Somebody else did, I'm sure, but you got to do the right thing for the patient, for the folks treating the patient. And, ultimately, you establish those lines of communication and trust, and you can have a great project, even if it, sometimes the drugs don't work. Like I said, you can have a great project and still end up with not a drug at the end.
Absolutely. Forrest, thank you very much for joining me today. And if you have any questions or comments, we can be reached at hello@metisconsultingservices.com. And if you have any questions for Forrest, we can absolutely put you in touch with him as well. Please feel free to reach out. And thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Queens of Quality podcast, and a special thank you to our incredible guest. By the way, we love hearing from you, our listeners. Please let us know what you think, or if you have any questions or comments, or if you would like to be a guest on the Queens of Quality podcast, you can email us at hello@metisconsultingservices.com, or check the show notes for more ways to contact us. I promise we read every email and take your thoughts into consideration for future episodes. And as always, if you could, take a few moments to rate or review us on your favorite streaming service. It makes a huge difference in getting the word out. Remember, folks, quality means patient safety first, and we are the Queens of Quality.